Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So the intro montage for this episode centralized around the beginnings of Thomas's shifter block-off panel, shifter filler panel, so on and so forth, however you want to refer to it as. And we will get to that later on in the video, but the project we're going to start with is the support bracket for his fuel pulse damper and fuel pressure regulator. So you can see, without much force applied to this, I can get this to shift around and move quite a bit, and that puts a ton of stress on these fasteners, on these fittings, and all of the stuff in the middle here, and everything through here. So we don't want that stress, and if I can move this around with the car static right now, imagine how that would be affected by dynamic forces with vibrations and everything else when the car is actually operational. So what we're going to do is use these two fasteners right here and make a little bracket going from the fuel pulse damper down to this stud on the chassis. And that'll tie all of this together and make it so it can't move around, and we don't really have to worry about anything breaking or anything falling apart. So what we're going to be using for this, materials-wise, is some of my favorite aluminum flat stock from Home Depot Racing. And I've used this a bunch of times on a variety of projects for customers, for my cars, and the stuff works phenomenally. It welds very nicely, it's easy to get, and it's just the best option that I've found. The best and most convenient, that is, for little brackets like this. So I guess the next thing to do is to actually go ahead and start figuring out how I'm going to craft this bracket and get to it. Do a great job of filming all of the little nuanced steps when it comes to building brackets like this. So let's go over everything now. So here is what we ended up with for Thomas's whole fuel pulse damper and pressure regulator bracket assembly deal here. So the bracket itself, there's a plate here and then a bent piece of strip that goes up, welds to the plate. You can see the weld right underneath of my finger there. It uses the two bolts that go through the fuel pulse damper and the one stud that coming out of the chassis. And it is all gusseted and triangulated or something along those lines. If I zoom in a little bit, you can see the little speed holes on it. I like to do that just for a little bit of an aesthetic effect, but all things considered, I'm very happy with the way that it came out, and it's done up with a nice coat of SEM trim black, as that kind of matches the anodized color, at least as best as I could do with the paints and the materials that I have on hand here. So the bracket kind of blends in with the rest of the engine bay, unless you are actually looking for it, which is exactly what I wanted this bracket to be. So now that that bracket is squared away and finished, I can now move on to making additional progress on our shifter block-off surround deal. So this is where I ended up the other day when I was playing around with it. You can see I have the boot that Thomas provided here, and I need to do a little bit of fine-tuning on my hole there, but we at least have a good base, to build off of for the rest of that. So I can take a couple of measurements, and then tomorrow when I come in, since it's the end of the day here now, I can go ahead and start moving forward, and I guess moving up and across for what I'll actually be doing with it, and getting that knocked out and squared away. And then at that point in time, the only thing left will be the third exhaust hanger. So I'm getting out of here now, but for you guys right now, why don't we go ahead and start working on that shifter a bit more. I stopped at Home Depot Racing again this morning and got some other options for the pieces for the little shifter deal that I'm building on Thomas's car. So we now, actually, I guess, let me appease my OCD real quick and order these appropriately. There we go. So we have 3/4 inch wide, 1 inch wide, 1.5 inch wide, all 8th inch thick pieces of strip stock right here. And those will serve as the verticals for this shifter base or shifter surround, block off panel. One of the litany of different names that I can apply to it, it'll be used on that. So what we're working with on this so far is this plate that I made for it that bolts into the factory location, and from there this should be pretty straightforward. I'm hoping to make this piece, the piece that I'm going to build, fit around here and bolt this ring down to the piece of aluminum, and that'll cover the shifter up and everything will be happy days there. So I need to see where my actual piece of the interior is, whatever this panel is here that goes over top of the shifter. I need to find that so I can make sure that the height that I'm choosing for this is appropriate and it isn't either too high. I guess it can't really be too short, but it isn't too high to make all of this work. If this all sits up too much, then the rest of it will not be able to fit underneath of that panel, and that will be no good. So let me go find where that is, and then we can start figuring out how to craft the rest of this, and it should be pretty smooth sailing from there. All right, with this out of the car now, this blue line is kind of what we need to follow to go around here, and that will be the vertically risen piece that the top plate will fit onto. So these little notches right here are to allow for clearance for a fastener. So there I'll go to the inside of the lines just to provide that much more clearance around there so this thing can actually be fastened down appropriately, and the rest of it can kind of be whatever it needs to be. So I'll take my 3/4 inch strip stock here and start forming it and fitting it around this, and hopefully it won't be too much of a nightmare, as I did order the correct tool to do this, but it won't be here until tomorrow, and I really want to get this done today. So I'll make it work, it'll look nice, and everything will be alright, and then we'll be ready, I guess, at that point in time to figure out the top portion of it, get this fastened down, and this will be another piece wrapped up for Thomas's car. I had to leave early yesterday to go with my mom to go get her a new car, so thankfully that process went as seamlessly as it possibly could. Buying cars, especially from dealerships, can always be a bit of a pain, but this went pretty smoothly. She has a new vehicle, and all of that being said, we're now back to work on Thomas's shifter block off filler panel deal. So yesterday we ended up with this, and the piece sits like this. Shifter comes through here, and this plate mounts down onto the chassis. All is well, all is fine, and now we need to go ahead and make the top panel. But in making the top panel, I need to figure out where the center of the shifter hole itself is. So for this top panel, I can cut an appropriate hole in it and then be able to mount everything and make the shifter fit the way that it needs to. So what I can do for this is to take this piece over, put it back in the car, and mark out a rough center for where the shifter will protrude up through it. So with our shifter panel in place, everything is going well aside from this area over here, where you can see that there's a bit of a gap from the side of the panel to the actual chassis. So I'll have to cut a little piece and weld it in place just to fill that gap in. But otherwise, everything else seems good to go. There's a little bit of a gap on this side, but I think that will be filled up by the piece of foam that I'm going to put in between the chassis and this panel. So that side should be good. It's just the driver's side that will need that little filler piece put in place. So not a big deal. I'll also mark out for that since I'm in here marking, and you can see my little permanent marker marks to mark out center for this guy here. And I guess the next thing I'll need to do is measure out the actual diameter of our little shifter bellows on the inside of it, since you can see it does have about a 1-inch flange, 3/4 inch or 1-inch flange going around. So we'll need that to mount it, and I'll just need to figure out what the actual inside diameter of this piece is so I can pop an appropriately sized hole into the top piece or the top plate, and then all will be well there. Thomas's shifter block off plate panel, filler panel deal, whatever you want to call it, is all squared away, and I couldn't be happier with the end result. So it's done in a nice coat of trim black, and it houses this bellows that separates the outside from the inside. I went ahead and I put a piece of foam going around to serve as a gasket between this block off panel and the inside of the car. And this is my dirty shifter surround, but this piece still goes back in place without issue. Well, without issue if I have two hands to latch it into place, but it fits nicely. The shifter is in the factory location, and all is well there. So I am very happy with how this piece came out, and I'm very happy that this portion of the project is completed. And now the only outstanding thing is the exhaust hanger. We are down to the final item on Thomas's Supra project. So what we are working on today is this exhaust hanger right here. So we have a hanger currently here, and we also have one here. But since this exhaust has a provision for an additional hanger right here, I'm going to go ahead and build something off of the subframe that incorporates this, as it will provide a little bit of additional support and a little bit of additional resistance to rotation and the exhaust not staying in place. So this looks like it should be fairly easy. I'll bend a bar that comes off of the subframe somewhere here that comes down, ties into this, and all will be well there. So pretty self-explanatory, and without further ado, let's go ahead and get to it, get this knocked out, and get Thomas's project squared away so we can get back to working on the silver cars. Now with Thomas's car back on the ground, firmly planted on all four of its tires, this project is a wrap. So with that addition of that final exhaust hanger, everything is squared away on this thing, and the list of projects that I was tasked with accomplishing are all accomplished, and this thing is good to go. So looking underneath of it, we have more than enough ground clearance, and the exhaust does not have the opportunity to run into any portions of the car, which is definitely a good thing. The intercooler tubes are all in place, and they're fastened so they don't have the ability to move around and run into anything. We have a bracket for the fuel pressure regulator and the fuel pulse damper, and Thomas now has a shifter panel for his new shifter and his new transmission and everything like that. So this project, it was a bunch of little projects, I'll call them, and I know that may be a little bit of a misnomer, as building a whole intercooler tube system or a whole titanium midpipe or any of the other projects on this, they can be large projects, and I guess for all intents and purposes they are, but they're things that I enjoy and I have fun with, and when you enjoy what you do, oftentimes it can make these projects seem a little bit less intensive than they actually are. But all of that being said, this car came out awesome. All the projects that worked on in these last few videos, or this build series rather, came out awesome. And at the end of the day, when you pop the hood on a car like this, and you see all of that cool stuff in there, and everything all plumbed up and ready to make a bunch of power, it's really a beautiful thing. So now the only thing left to do is let Thomas know the car's completed and schedule the logistics portion of it, of when he can send the tow truck that brought the car here back up, take this thing back so he can get it finished up. So I can't wait to see him get this project wrapped up. I know it's been multiple years in the making. I'm sure he is very excited and very antsy to get going on the wiring and to get the rest of it squared away so he can enjoy this beautiful example of a Mark IV Supra. And Thomas, I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to play a small part in this masterpiece that you're putting together. And hopefully I get to see it and maybe even experience it when you get the car up and going and all squared away. But with all that being said, I think that's going to be about the end of this video and this build series. So I hope that you guys enjoyed it, coming along, learning some things, seeing the way that my mind works to build parts for cars like this. And it was really fun to work on all of the different projects that I worked on with this. And even though I don't do custom stuff that much, and I generally don't enjoy doing custom work, these cars, for whatever reason, I do enjoy it on these things. So with all of that being said, and another project in the books, I think that'll be about the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.